Please be seated.
Say something.
Thank you, Chair. Yesterday I asked a question of Archbishop Porteous, and you'll find the reference on page 25749 of yesterday's date, which was the 21st of February. I reviewed the transcript, and I think my question needs clarification. What I should have said was, and this would be the question, if the past claims history provided to us by the Catholic Church indicates that 1 in 14 or 7% of priests were alleged to have engaged in sexual activity with a child, and that collective package of issues is not addressed, what is there to reassure the community that going forward there will not be claims alleging child sexual abuse against 7% of priests? So that's the clarification. Thank you.
Your Honour, today we have 7 witnesses comprising the panel who are representatives from a variety of religious institutes.
Sister, gentlemen, you all need to be sworn. Would you all take an oath on the Bible? Yes. There should be enough Bibles, so if you would all stand for me, make sure you have your hand on a Bible, and then together repeat after me. I swear by Almighty God.
I swear by Almighty God.
The evidence I shall give to this Royal Commission.
That the evidence I shall give to this Royal Commission
shall be the truth.
Shall be the truth.
The whole truth.
The whole truth.
And nothing but the truth.
And nothing but the truth.
Thank you. Take a seat, please.
Thank you, Your Honour. Sister, can I start with you, please? Sister, could I ask you to state your full name?
Sister Bernice Locke.
Thank you. And Sister, you've provided 2 statements for this case study in the Royal Commission, a statement of the 29th of September 2016
yes.
and also a statement of the 8th of December 2016.
Yes.
Are both of those statements true and correct?
Yes.
Do you have copies of them with you?
I have copies of the main witness statement. I don't actually have the second one with me.
Thank you.
I know it fairly well. I don't think it'll bother me.
If it becomes necessary...
Could you just make sure that mic's turned towards you so that we...
That better?
Everyone, yes, everyone can hear you.
Sister, if I need to ask you anything about the second statement which related to education,
yes, education.
And we need to get a copy of it, I'll get you a copy.
Thank you.
Thank you. Sister, what's your current position?
I'm the Institute leader for the Institute of Sisters of Mercy of Australia and Papua New Guinea.
Thank you. And how long have you been in that position?
This is just beginning my 6th year in the position.
Thank you. Now, I think the Institute went through a restructure in 2011, is that right?
It came into being as a result of a restructure where 15 separate groups, autonomous groups of Sisters of Mercy came together as one institute.
So the Institute, as it's now formed, comprises all of Australia and Papua New Guinea, is that right?
No, it doesn't actually. There are still 3 other autonomous groups: Sisters of Mercy Brisbane, Sisters of Mercy Parramatta and Sisters of Mercy North Sydney.
And they operate independently of your institute?
Yes, as we used to do.
Thank you. How many members of the order under your institute are there at the moment?
I won't be certain about today, but it would be about 811, 815.
What ministries are they involved in?
The sisters themselves would be in a very wide range of ministries, from the formal ministries that were common in the past, such as education, healthcare, aged care, care of disabled, care of children in need, through to more individually commenced ministries which are still owned by the whole institute, such as counselling, drama education. It really is, it's quite a mix.
Thank you. In terms of the ministries that involve regular engagement with children, firstly, there's some involvement in schools, which I'll ask you to elaborate on a little in a moment. You've mentioned care of children in need, are there any particular institutions or bodies that
Yes.
relate to children in need?
St Joseph's Cowper would be the main one.
What do they do?
They care for children who basically can't be placed in foster care.
Thank you.
There's also a co-sponsored very big ministry, MacKillop Family Services, which has a lot of children in care. I know the Commissioner's had some interaction with MacKillop Family Services, and we are a co-sponsor of that, which is we share the canonical authority with some of the some others.
Who are the others that you share it with?
The Christian Brothers and the Sisters of St Joseph, and each of us supply 2 representatives to become the group offering canonical governance for that group.
Thank you. And is that a residential care?
They've got all sorts of things. They've got foster care placements. They do have some residential care. There is a really wide range of family and community-based services coming from that organisation.
Thank you. Now, just focusing on schools, if we can for a moment, Sister, you've explained in your statement that the sisters are involved in schooling through a civil and canonical authority called Mercy Education Limited, is that right? Mm-hmm. So that's exists as what's called a public juridic person in canon law, is that right?
Well, it is, but normally when we use that term public juridic person, we're referring more to the newly established ministerial PJPs. In point of fact, yes, any congregation is a public juridic person in canon law, as is a diocese, as is a parish. So in this instance, the canonical governance is with the Institute. It's not with one of the newly formed ministerial PJPs.
Thank you. And so Mercy Education Limited has delegated authority from the Institute to run the schools. Is that how it works?
Yes, very much so. It is a company limited by guarantee, and it has a small number of reserve powers, but other than that, it is completely responsible for the running of the colleges, the schools.
And there's some 12 colleges across Victoria, Western Australia and South Australia?
Yes.
And you also share governance with other authorities in relation to some other schools?
We do. There is one school embedded in what I previously referred to as MacKillop Family Services, and then there are 3 other co-governed colleges.
Now, just focusing on the colleges that are run by Mercy Education Limited, there's a board of that company, I take it, and I think you've said in your statement 5 sisters from the Institute leadership team are on the board. Is that right?
No, I don't think there's that many. No, there wouldn't be 5 on the board.
Who is on the board of Mercy Education Limited?
Well, the chair is a woman who's had vast experience in education and other, good areas of ministry. They're nearly all lay people. I think we've only got 1 sister actually on the board.
Thank you. Do you sit on the board?
No. No, I think that's a conflictual situation because we have other reserve powers. So I don't sit on the board.
Thank you. And do the sisters teach in those schools?
There are sisters in the schools. We have 1 sister principal. We have 1 who's a deputy principal, but that's in one of the co-governed. But we have quite a number of sisters who fill a range of positions, including some of the pastoral positions within those colleges and schools.
Thank you. Just turning to the governance of the Institute rather than the schools body, do you have any laity involved in the governance of the Institute?
According to our constitutions, the only people who can be in the Institute leadership team are members, which are, that just by definition is sisters. However, we do have quite a number of laity involved in our structure, including in our governance type of structures, and Certainly our executive leader operations is lay. The executive executive officer ministry governance is a lay person who has a great deal to do with our governance structure. So yes, throughout the organisation there are a lot.
Thank you.
Men and women.
What is your relationship with the international institute, if any?
Mercy International Association. It is an association and would be recognised easily as such. We are a member of that organisation.
Are you supervised by them in any sense, or do you report to them on your function?
No, it is very much a voluntary sharing arrangement. There is no authority structure at all.
And in terms of authority to discipline or dismiss a sister, does that lie entirely with you as the leader?
Yes.
Thank you.
According to our constitutions, which means I do have to have the vote of the council and things like that if I were to take that type of action.
Thank you. Now, Sister, the Sisters of Mercy and yourself had some involvement in case study 26, which concerned Rockhampton and sexual abuse at the St Joseph's Orphanage in Nearcole. You've indicated in your statement some of the responses that the Institute has taken to some of the issues that arose in that case study.
Yes.
Can you just perhaps outline for the Commission what you see as the key responses that your Institute has taken?
Before the Institute was actually established, the groups of leaders who were bringing congregations together actually established a professional standards policy in a draft form. There wasn't, until the Institute began, an authority to put that in place, but it was one of the very first things that the elected leadership of the new group did. And from then on, we have worked to put that policy into place by creating the structures and giving it the personnel that it actually needs. So if I just skip across to what's now, we have a professional standards unit. We do only have one professional standards officer, but she is assisted she works with our General Counsel, who spends quite a bit of time in this area, and there is administrative assistance, and more recently we are putting more resources into education. It's still a developing thing, but we actually have tried to take advantage of all that we have learned, certainly from the Royal Commission there, but also in terms of what was happening in all of the groups beforehand as well.
You've also indicated in your statement that some changes have been made in relation to the archives and records keeping. Is that right?
Yes, because the archives were scattered across all of those areas, and in order to do the best job we could in trying to help people to access archival records and also to help ourselves, we have needed to amalgamate quite a few of those collections. We haven't yet amalgamated all of them, but one of the things we did very quickly at the beginning was to bring together all of the professional standards files from all of those different collections so that we could at least access those quite quickly. Now, it's different when you come to a person coming to us because they were at a certain home. And it was a big job because across the period we're talking about, we would have had 17 homes for children and as many as 80 boarding schools. So we are collecting those archives and housing them in such a way that you can administer them very well is an ongoing challenge, but we did give professional standards the highest priority within that.
So do I take it from what you've said that process is still ongoing?
Yes, it is.
Thank you. And are those records, to the extent you've then compiled them, are they made available to anyone who comes with a complaint?
We do everything we can, and not all of the records are in our own direct control. Some of the records were passed to other places, as the work was passed. Again, McKillop Family Services is a very good example, where the records coming from some of those former institutions have ended up there, and they, in my view, do a very good job of helping people access files. But we do the best we can, and there are many people involved in just making that the best process we can. It's also obviously a time when people who are coming, perhaps looking for records for the first time, need a fair bit of pastoral care, because it's not always an easy journey.
Sister, I was going to ask you about that. Your organisations, if I can put it that way, have been responsible for many, many children who, by reason of circumstances, were unable to live with a family.
Yes.
And lived in one of your institutions. And as you know, in those institutions, many were abused.
I'm sorry, but it's true.
It's a terrible story. But of course, there's a double component to their grief, isn't there? There's the original loss of family, and then there's the loss of innocence that comes from the abuse that was inflicted, which was not only, of course, sexual, but there was significant physical abuse inflicted as well.
It was.
In your responses to these people, to those who respond, to those who come to you looking for assistance, are they all well informed as to the nature and consequences of the suffering which these people have had?
The people offering help are all of the people who come. See, not everybody who comes is in any level of distress. Some of them are just doing family research, attempting to know who they are, where they fit in. I think I can claim that our people giving the access or helping people to get the access are very aware of the fact that it can be quite a traumatic process.
Yes, even someone who doesn't necessarily appear to be traumatised, coming to seek an understanding of who they are,
yes,
where they came from and what happened to them,
yes,
are people with a great deal of need, aren't they?
I think so, yes.
Sister, do you involve yourself personally in the pastoral response to people who come and see you in respect of, if we can focus on complaints of past abuse?
Yes, but I'm not the only person who responds. If I were to do all of the responding, we would end up holding up resolution, and we don't think that's a good outcome. So I do some mediation meetings, for instance, can happen in any state. We have arrangements in place whereby we have sisters in every state who will go on our behalf if that's the way to resolve it.
Thank you. So is it the case that in any individual claim you may get involved at some point,
yes,
but not necessarily?
Yes, that's true. I will always know about it. I won't necessarily be the person involved in the mediation.
Can I ask you about formation, Sister? And firstly, focusing on initial formation and entering into the Institute. Do you still have people currently in formation?
Yes, we have much lesser numbers than would have been any part of that experience from the past. At present, we don't have any novices in Australia. We have 9 women in temporary vows, 2 in Australia and 7 in Papua New Guinea.
You've said in your statement that there's a trend towards those who are entering religious life doing it at an older age than used to be the case.
Yes.
Are there any rules in particular about how old you have to be to begin the process or take final vows?
General guidelines, which would be mid-20s, would be about as young as we would wish to go.
And is that to begin the process or to take final vows?
That would be to begin the process. Final vows will be 6 to 11 years later, depending on when a person feels ready and, of course, the intervention of those who are involved in formation.
How long have those guidelines been in place?
Oh. Decades.
Thank you. So the trend towards older people entering the process has been around for a while.
Oh, yes.
You've mentioned in your statement some of the particular components of the formation process, in particular in relation to human formation and the emphasis on physical and spiritual and psychosexual development. Again, are you aware of how recent those matters are in formation? Does that reflect a shift in emphasis or something that's been around for a while?
Again, around for decades, really. Yes.
What is the practice in relation to overseas people who might either present for formation or come having taken their vows overseas?
It doesn't happen with us. We do have overseas formation. We have members in Papua New Guinea, as I said. Our formation for the women in Papua New Guinea happens in Papua New Guinea. We don't attempt to bring them here. There is younger women from here we'll go to meet with, to be with, but the two formation programs are exactly similar but conducted in two different countries.
Thank you. And in terms of the sisters who are in ministry in Australia, they've undertaken their formation within Australia, is that?
With one exception that I can think of at the moment, and that is a Sister of Mercy from New Zealand who actually is with us at present.
Thank you, Sister. Now, in relation to ongoing formation, this is something that you may be aware has emerged in some of the evidence the Commission's heard over the last few weeks as a matter that some people see as particularly important to maintaining a healthy religious life and clergy life. And you've said in your statement that the sisters' process of ongoing formation is under review and needs to be more consistent and more readily available. Can you just explain a little what you mean?
Yes, that was with regard to professional standards, but not only with regard to professional standards. We do a lot of ongoing formation, but when it comes to professional standards, we didn't have consistent practice across those 15 groups. We have put a lot of effort in the last 12 months into designing and implementing, which is not yet fully rolled out, a process of educating our sisters and staff members in professional standards and related matters, such as bullying and so on. And we are now looking at how that rolls out over the next few years so that it can be consistently available and offered, but also so that it brings in the related questions and is a real contribution to any person being able to develop their own, personality and skills.
Thank you. Is that an online resource or a course?
We haven't yet put it online. Our decision was that it will go online, but our decision was first to roll it out face-to-face. One of our educators was very aware that what can happen is if people just have a choice of doing it online, sometimes that's all they ever do and they never get to talk about the implications. So, yes, we'll put it online, but it will be both.
Thank you. And just in relation to personal, professional supervision, you've indicated in your statement that sisters who are in ministry are encouraged to undertake personal professional supervision. Can you just tell us a bit about how that in fact occurs in practice?
Mm-hmm. It's, again, a variable, depending, not the practice, but the way in which people take it up does vary. And that's as much a matter of what resources are available where they happen to be as anything else. It would be very often individual sessions on a regular basis with somebody who's qualified to offer that. Some undertake group supervision which, when it's run well, can be extremely helpful. Some would Skype into to be able to access somebody with skills. I would have to say that the level of skills available is not consistent. There aren't all that many people who really understand what you're talking about. So it's not easy, but I think we're doing it fairly consistently.
Is it organised at the institute level?
No, it's only for the only time it's organised at institute level is for the sisters who belong to Macaulay Ministries, which is our umbrella for the ministries for which the institute leader in the past would have been directly responsible. So we do have a CEO of that organisation, and in that instance, they would be helped to access a supervisor if they couldn't locate one for themselves, etc.
Thank you. What about yourself, Sister? Have you had any supervision arrangements since you became the head of the institute? Yes,
I have regular supervision.
Thank you.
I find it a very helpful process.
Is that with an external professional person?
Oh, yes.
Thank you. Now, Sister, I understand that the Institute has convened a professional standards consultative panel. Is that right? And is that a recent innovation?
It's over 12 months old. I think it's... I can't remember just when we put it in place, but everything in the Institute's fairly recent because it's only 5 years old.
Thank you.
But it doesn't go back to 2012. It wasn't the first thing we did.
The members of that panel include people qualified in law and social services. Is that right? Are there sisters on the panel?
No, not as... Yes, there is. There's one sister on the panel. She's got a social work background.
Thank you. And what's the role of the panel?
The panel is essentially to make sure that we've got some external advice coming in on how we respond to claims, how we handle claims, what our policies are, what our practices are. So they work quite closely with our professional standards officer and general counsel.
Thank you. So if there were to be changes to the policies, they would be prompted by advice from the panel. Is that how it works?
Or if not prompted, then at least run past the panel to see if there's any additional wisdom they want to bring to that.
Thank you, Sister. Brother Clinch, can I turn to you?
Just before we move on from Sister, just a couple of questions, if I might. One is in relation to the abuse by religious sisters, sexual abuse conducted by sisters, and the figures the Commission has put out indicates that there were 96 religious sisters who were alleged to be perpetrators across religious orders in Australia, not the Institute. Has there been any work by either your institute or the member of the sisters institutes that existed before that, or other orders of religious women, as to what the profile of the female perpetration was, or the learnings or lessons from that particular cohort of alleged perpetrators? In other words, to many in the community, it is a surprise that there were any, yet alone 96, religious sisters accused of being perpetrators. And I was just wondering, has there been any formal review or study undertaken by your or other religious female orders?
No, Commissioner, not that I'm aware of.
So, in answer to Mr Free, you've indicated a number of very positive initiatives that have been put in place. But to what extent have they been informed by an understanding of what took place previously? In other words, if we don't understand why and what took place previously, how do we in fact know that we're getting it right today?
I think the circumstances are really quite hard to compare. The way in which people are involved in ministry today, Commissioner, is really quite different. Many of, as I understand it, and I do need help with this yet, I will have to ask somebody to help me to analyse those figures as they have implications. But I think it's almost true to say that most of those occurred or are alleged to have occurred in homes for children or boarding schools, and where just the work was very hard, the work was extremely difficult. I'm not justifying in any way, shape or form any kind of abuse, but I don't think the circumstances are exactly parallel. However, what we are looking at today is how does, all abuse goes back to a domination type of approach. How does that find expression in today's religious life, and to what degree can we learn from the past to be sure that we're not going to be offending, whether it's actually detected as sexual abuse or any other type of abuse?
I just want to be very clear, the 96 does not refer just to the Sisters of Mercy,
no, it
but
doesn't.
Across all of the female religious orders. But second and related to that is, one of the things that's occurred in both the private sessions and more generally in the case studies is the extraordinary level of humiliating behaviours,
yes,
physical abuse that were done to children in the homes that you've referred to. In fact, it's a very dominant theme. Is your order in any way yet to understand why the level of physical and humiliating activities existed to the extent they did in those homes?
It's deeply shameful to us that it ever happened. I believe a lot of the understanding is, as we currently understand it, is related to the lack of adequate professional development. It was fairly lacking at the time. The lack of adequate supervision, the pressures, and the pressures often led to you needed staff so much that you overlooked some of the behaviours, which should never have been overlooked. So I think there's a whole complexity of reasons, but no reason explains what happened, and it's still just a matter of huge regret.
Just to lead on from that, my final question is, it's been put to us in different fora that part of the reason for the high level of physical abuse and some sexual abuse was that, in fact, the formation programs of the religious sisters were themselves abusive towards young novices and young sisters, and that, in a sense, that, in fact, was part of the systemic reasons why such abuse occurred. Do you think that's a fair statement?
It appears to be, from what I can hear. It was never my own experience, so I'm only going on what other people tell me, and I think it did happen at least in some instances.
And you mentioned that part of the formation training relates to that in terms of, you mentioned the word bullying. When you talk about bullying as part of the formation or ongoing professional development, you're talking about, are you talking about bullying by sisters within your own congregations?
We are talking about preventing bullying, not so much, there are in place policies for dealing with it, but we are talking about making sure people are aware that bullying behaviour is also a form of abuse.
Within the institute or within the congregations? Within
our sisters and within our staff, widely spread, anywhere.
Thank you.
Brother Clinch, can I turn to you, please? Can you give your full name?
Yes, my name is Peter Clinch.
Thank you. And you're the provincial leader of the Congregation of Christian Brothers?
Correct.
How long have you held that position?
About just over 2 years.
Thank you. When did you join the order?
I was a novice in 1972 and did my 1 year of juniorate in 1971. So officially I joined the order when I took first vows at the beginning of 1973.
Thank you, brother. Now, you've provided statements to the Royal Commission for this case study dated the 20th of October 2016 and the 14th of December 2016, is that right?
That's correct.
And are the contents of those statements true and correct?
They are.
Now, the Christian Brothers also underwent some relatively recent institutional reorganisation. Can you tell us what happened in 2007?
Prior to 2007, there were 4 Australian provinces, and we amalgamated to become one province under the banner of Oceania. And joining Oceania was the region of Papua New Guinea and the province of New Zealand. And we have a presence of brothers presently in East Timor and the Philippines. that would come under the banner now of Oceania.
Thank you. And just to get a sense of the present activities of the members of the province, the Christian Brothers within the province, can you just tell us, focusing on the activities that involve regular engagement with children, what the Christian Brothers are doing?
In Australia, very few. The average age of our brothers is now 78. Our largest cohort is between 75 and 85. So by far, most, if not all, no, most of our brothers are retired. And a good number of those are in aged care facilities themselves. Those who were directly involved in schooling, which is, again, separated from the congregation, my recollection there is 4 brothers who are engaged with Edmund Rice Education Australia, 2 in mainstream schooling and 2 in what we call flexi learning centres.
What's a flexi learning centre?
Flexi Learning Centre is a reasonably new concept. Wasn't introduced by the congregation. Edmund Rice Education Australia, it's their invention. And it picks up students who, we might say, fall through the gaps of regular schooling. And they are quite in number now, mainly in Queensland, but now going to most states of Australia.
Thank you. Now, can you just explain a little what Edmund Rice Education Australia is?
Yes. Back in 2007, when Oceania Province came into being, Edmund Rice Education Australia commenced. There had been somewhat good planning beforehand, many years before, may have been a decade before, leading to this of 2007. And they gradually took over the governance, both civil and canonical, of all previous Christian Brothers schools. And in 2013, the end of, Edmund Rice Education Australia became, both by civilly and canonically, independent from the congregation. And I think what Sister Bernice called earlier a ministerial PJP. So for us, you could either get a PJP, public juridic person, which before was equivalent of myself or a bishop. You can apply to the Vatican, or you can apply through the local bishops' conference. For reasons which I'm not 100% certain on, we, the Christian Brothers, went through the Vatican. And so we're a pontifical regard there. So they gave us, after due process, the right to have a PJP. And that PJP not belonging to one person, it belongs to a group of people called the Council of Edmund Rice Education. And they in turn appoint a board who really do the managing and the executive arm of EREA.
And it's also established as a company for civil law purposes.
Correct. So their business name is Edmund Rice Education Australia, and it's a company, and they have the capacity to take loans and own property.
Thank you. And is it the case that there is a delegation from the province to Edmund Rice Education Australia for the governance of the schools? Is that how it works?
No. The Christian Brothers, Oceania Province and EREA are separate. And that was pretty strict at the beginning, how we could get the boundaries right. There was a bit of blurring maybe early. But I know for my role now, I would be in contact. We have one formal meeting a year, which is not in the Constitution, but we do it with the Council, Edmund Rice Education Council, which would be a half-a-day meeting followed by dinner. That's our formal contact. And I would have some contact with the Executive Director of Edmund Rice Education if they want to clarify some historical matter.
Are there any Christian Brothers on either the Council of Edmund Rice Education or the board?
Yes, there is. There are 2 on the council at the moment. And at this stage, I don't think there's any on the board. There was one last year, but that person has resigned.
Thank you. Now, I think you indicated in your statement that the position in New South Wales, at least until fairly recently, was slightly different, but there was a transfer in process. Has that been completed?
No, it hasn't. As we know, there's an archdiocese and 2 dioceses in Sydney, Parramatta and Broken Bay. we have negotiated with the local bishop there, the ordinary, about we call it in canon law, the bishop needs to give a mandate to the EREA to run a school there. So any school, even when we're Christian Brothers, you come into that diocese or archdiocese at the invitation of the local ordinary. So those two schools, after there's an agreement, a mandate has been offered. The legal signing over of properties, etc., hasn't happened as yet, but is in the process of. With the Archdiocese of Sydney, the negotiations are still at an early stage, but they have commenced. And I know that the President of the Council has met with the Director of the CEO of the Archdiocese, Mr Dan White.
So until that happens, Edmund Ross Education Australia is running the schools in New South Wales, but it's doing it on behalf of the Institute. Is that right? Yeah,
the congregation, yes. They are delegated, you might say, by myself to do that. And at this stage, I would have had very little involvement.
Thank you. Now, you've said in your statement that the Christian Brothers no longer have vocations within Australia. Is that
correct?
What do you?
Sorry?
Can you just explain a little what you mean by that?
Yes. The Christian Brothers in Australia, we're about 280. And as I said, most of our brothers are 75 plus. I think our oldest Australian Christian brother is 53, and he did his novitiate in 1983.
Do you mean your youngest?
Sorry?
You mean your youngest?
Youngest, did I? Sorry, yes. Youngest brother would be 53. I know that we had a novitiate. A number of people joined us in the 90s, but have no longer didn't stay very long. And we had a novitiate in Sydney in the early 2000s, and that was mainly for a New Zealand brother and a Papua New Guinean. And again, they have not stayed.
And you no longer have facilities in Australia to offer the novitiate?
Correct.
Do you seek candidates for the order?
It's a point of contention with our own brothers, but we don't. And some would say that we shouldn't, which I'm partly in favour of. And there was others that said we've folded up the tent too early. But it's my opinion that if you look at the statistics and you look at the evidence that's around us, we need to be gracious in our final years and make sure things are in place. Example, Edmund Rice Education Australia, who can do that work effectively and well.
So do you envisage then, brother, that in 30 or 40 years, Christian Brothers will essentially just be a brand on schools run by lay people?
I don't think even the brand will be there. It would be Edmund Rice Education Australia. I think the brand Christian Brothers will be no more.
Thank you, brother. And I take it the Christian Brothers no longer has any involvement in orphanages or out-of-home care institutions?
No, they haven't. The ones in the West where we were in Victoria, all those, they're gone. They don't even exist any longer. I think as Sister Bernice said, we are at the moment part of the membership of MacKillop Family Services. So that amalgamated way back in the 90s sometime, middle 90s, with the Josephite Sisters, Mercy Sisters and the Christian Brothers. Our care agencies there combined into one, and they effectively are autonomous from us. I think the members meet twice a year, and we have one member of our province leadership team who is one of those members.
So that's a governance body for the
Correct. A co-sponsoring, you might say, governance.
Thank you. Now, Brother Clinch, have you read the data report which has been published by the Royal Commission, or at least the parts of it which relate to the Christian Brothers?
Yeah, I have had a perusal. I've had, yes, and I've heard of it.
Thank you. So I just want to ask you about some of the key figures in relation to the Christian Brothers. They indicate 1,015 people made a claim of child sexual abuse against the Christian Brothers. The average age of those claimants was 11 years of age. 98% of them were male. And as a result the Christian Brothers has made the highest total payment of any of the religious institutes. It's paid out some $48.5 million in relation to 763 payments. There were a total of 301 Christian Brothers who were alleged to be perpetrators, and taking into account the waiting for service, which Ms Furness explained a few days ago, the conclusion in the report is that 22% of Christian Brothers who ministered between 1950 and 2010 were the subject of a claim of child sexual abuse. Now, you must have had cause to reflect on those numbers. Can you tell us what your reflections are about those numbers and what they mean for the Christian Brothers?
They were shattering for me. And I find hard to put words around it, but I will try now. And I'm appalled, shamed, humbled. When I saw those stark figures, I had a realisation that abuse had happened. I knew that back in the 90s when they started to become quite public. I think I was shocked beyond my capability nearly in the Ballarat hearing, when I was there for most of it, to hearing the impact statement. And it was during that hearing that the figures were started to be released. I think Gail Furness actually mentioned some of the numbers then. So when the numbers came recently, I wasn't kind of blown over that they were just so terrible. I deeply regret it, and it challenges our brothers to the core why we exist.
Have you formed any views of your own brother about whether there are any particular characteristics of the order, either now or in the past, that might explain what seems to be a particularly high propensity for abuse to occur?
Yes, I certainly have. I've had a number of small groups of brothers to share with me and our team. As the senior man, a 90-year-old, that I stay with me, and I'll give what he said. He said in the early days we valued the individual. Like even in the very early days we had tailor shops and bakeries as part of the institute that would meet the needs of individuals. And then competition seemed to come in. Competition for exam results or gaining entry into public service or things like that. And so the emphasis shifted from meeting individual needs to the image and the reputation of the institute, the school. And with that came the scourge of corporal punishment, the harshness, thinking that this would gain better results and give the student a better advantage in life, but in fact could have even done the opposite. There are other factors that certainly come in. I think even when the first Irish brothers came to Australia, there was a frenetic activity by brothers. We are doers rather than reflectors. So I don't think, particularly in the days where this abuse happened, we reflected or thought about what are we doing, why do we do it? And I think we became the foot soldiers of the church. We worked damn hard in the name of good education. And by working hard, I'd mean you'd be up early for your religious activities. You'd be in school fairly early preparing. You might teach coach football or a sporting team as well as teach. For myself, I did part-time university studies to improve on qualifications. And you became exhausted. And those who were in the residential institutions was even more so, because they would have had supervision duties on top of that. So with the lack of reflection and seeking some form of gratification, unfortunately, that did happen in a form of abuse of children. And coupled with that, those early years of formation, where the Christian brothers, I think you mentioned it, asking Sister Bernice about humiliation. Well, that happened with us.
Brother, back in case study 11, which concerned the Christian brothers, one of the matters that was looked at was a study that was in fact commissioned back in 1996 by the Christian brothers.
Yes.
Which sought to investigate these issues. What were there problems with the Christian brothers that might explain in particular levels of abuse? And one of the key conclusions of that study was that formation practices historically, as well as elements of community life, were not only deficient but in fact harmful to brothers. Is that something that you see as significant?
Very. Yeah, that was the Faulkner report.
Yes.
I read it. It wasn't widely received at the time. I think in 1996 we had a general chapter. That means all the provinces of the congregation worldwide came together where it was presented. I don't think it was used effectively enough, and I regret that to this day. But still, saying the point that you asked me of, is the violence of early formation or abuse there, humiliation, it was there. And in the brothers community, particularly in my early years, I go back nearly 40 years, where there were bigger communities, like in, for example, some communities would have been the size of 20 brothers, there was what we call banter. But the banter was really not about fun. It was about putting others down through, innuendo, joke. And I think that was harmful. And I know that some of my co-confreres found it very difficult and left the congregation, mainly due to the lack of love or intimacy by fellow community members. Now, I think the big difference is the communities are a lot smaller and the sharing is a lot better.
Brother, I think everyone can understand what you say about the circumstances which brothers were formed and the culture. And we hear what you say about those matters leading to physical abuse of children, physical domination. But why sexual abuse? Can you help us there? Why sexual abuse?
My only thinking, Your Honour, would be around the area that a lot of brothers before my time, but those who were involved in the 60s and 70s and 50s when this abuse was at its worst, would have entered so-called juniorate formation. So some would have been as young as 14. And they entered and really lived a religious life as if you were a 25-year-old under vows. Even though they weren't under vows, they still lived a very strict routine. And to me, I think it was Peter Evans who gave the evidence, which I recall, and I semi-paraphrase what he said, that it stunted their psychosexual development and they were uneasy with adult relationships. And so I think this resulted, unfortunately, with the poor development of psychosexual emotional development in relationships, the dominance over young people exerted itself in a very catastrophic way in the way of abuse, both physical and sexual.
Now, I take it that the culture that you speak of when you were formed and others and the generations of which you speak, I take it that culture has been with the Christian brothers for a long time. Would that be right?
It's hard to know to put a length on it, but yes, it would have been for decades. Where did it start? I think, well, my reading of history, Your Honour, was that our founder, Edmund Rice, and it came soon after that where the competition crept in. So it wasn't soon after the original years. So yes, they've been there a long time, and it's been built upon, until I believe the present time it's collapsed. it's been an implosion, and because the foundations have been rocked.
The inference you would draw from accepting that it's been there for a long time is that there would have been many children who were abused who, of course, have now passed on.
Yeah,
We just have no way of understanding how many children have been, over the time of the Christian Brothers, abused in their institutions.
Sadly, that is the correct case, and it's my understanding, particularly in the West, with the homes or the orphanages that were there. And it's just not those who have deceased. There's some who have never come forward.
Brother Clinch, I want to reflect on the future a little, if I can. My understanding of the evidence given to us both in case studies and in these hearings is that secrecy and the lack of internal accountability resulted in a full knowledge of the extent of abuse that was going on. And your own remark about how you were shocked at the Ballarat hearing indicates that kind of attitude. And this is despite these matters coming to public notice from the 80s, really, on a wide scale. It seems to be that a tradition and practice of secrecy and to cover up issues. In other words, for an outgoing provincial not to give complete files to an incoming provincial, for an outgoing bishop not to give complete information to an incoming bishop, has been part of the culture which has allowed perpetrators continue to abuse over decades, as opposed to being stopped in their tracks. Have you made any efforts as a very senior man in your order to persuade those to whom you report internationally to change that culture of secrecy and cover-up and the lack of accountability?
Yes, certainly. I agree that there's evidence, and you can't deny it, that did happen in the past. Currently, I'm appointed by our congregation leader, is Hugh O'Neill, who's a Canadian by birth, and we reside, there's a leadership team in Rome. Now, we meet annually now, that's their decision, and so I was in Rome last year, June, for 2 weeks, and at that meeting, this very thing was raised and was discussed at length by other provincials of the congregation, and we started a draft protocol that would be in effect for the whole congregation. Unfortunately, I haven't got it, it's not even in written form yet. We are meeting again this June, and that's the intent, to finish that. And I know Hugh O'Neill is very much aware of the Australian scene. He's contacted me several times wanting updates and made questions about a couple of brothers that he had heard of. So he is very much aware, and our records now are far more transparent in that all our meetings, I belong to a leadership team, and it's very much a team approach to leadership rather than a focus on me, the provincial. And in that team, we must have accurate meetings minutes. Shane Wall from the province lead professional standards would be part of that monthly meeting and give us updates, and we in turn. So there's checks and balances starting to emerge that are part of our organisation. And I know that when the CLT intend, that's a congregation leadership team, are intend visiting us next year, and they will be here for about 6 weeks. They'll spend most of their time with us, the leadership team. And I've got no doubt that the professional standards, recording, how we're responding to abuse cases will be part of that agenda.
Which I hope would include early reporting to the police or the child protection authorities.
Oh yes, yes.
That's part of the protocol.
I can't recall, but I would hope you've raised it here and that protocol isn't being completed, and it certainly can.
Can I just clarify one thing arising from that? Can you just explain to us the extent of the Christian Brothers around the world and which countries are actually increasing, not diminishing?
Yes. At the moment, my latest figures would be there's about 980 brothers congregationally, and the growth, if we want to call it for that, where there are novitiates, are in Africa. We have 2 novitiates, well, really 1 at the moment, but there are 2 situations, and in India. There is a slight growth in South America, but there's no novitiate at the moment. And I think in the United States of America, I read in their latest bulletin that they've taken 1 novice recently.
You've indicated to His Honour some of the factors that you believe have given rise to sexual abuse. But just to explore that a little bit further, what we see both in Ireland and in Australia seems such an extraordinary deviation from the charism and mission and values of the founding father, Edmund Rice and others, that it's hard to understand how an organisation can so deviate from its original purpose, as we've seen in these 2 countries. What's in place that would ensure that in these emerging countries where the Christian Brothers are continuing to grow, that would not occur again? So it's not just about child protection, but it's actually something that's far more fundamental. And the figures in Ireland are even more shocking and alarming than the Australian figures. So how is it that going forward, this same institutional dysfunctionality would in fact not occur?
That's a great question, Commissioner, and it's one that's played on my mind, even though my jurisdiction is within Oceania. But when we meet together, I know that there are programs for formators, and there has been a special program only this year in Lusaka in Zambia, where those who are in initial formation, that means those who are the leaders of that formation, are coming together. And I know now that any appointment to the formation of young men into the Christian Brothers has to be made by the congregational leader, not by the local provincial. So they vetted at both levels, both provincial and higher level. I know that in Africa there are particular issues there that are local, but in the way that you say, and it's very true, that the founding charism has been shaken, where we would stand in solidarity with those made poor. And what we did, we added to the suffering rather than alleviated. So I know that in Africa, they've gone more to community development projects rather than to large institutions. In Africa, we would not run any residential homes. I know in India, they've stopped doing that. I know in India, they've stopped the juniorates. So they'll only take people well on their advanced in years. In Africa, I know that their postulancy or beginning, they have 2 years of postulancy before they even go to the novitiate. And they're required to have a minimum level of education. So there are things in place that means a man wouldn't come nowhere near 14, be more like 25 even to start the process.
Okay.
So there's some things that are starting to emerge.
Thank you.
Brother, do you receive any professional supervision?
I do take professional supervision by an external psychologist. And the thing that we've started to do as a team, we found that we were traumatised by what was happening. That's what people were telling us, the feedback, that we're in a state of trauma. So we have instituted and started group supervision by a trauma therapist. And we meet that woman about every 6 weeks or as required. And we met her often last year.
Who is the we that you're talking about there?
At the moment, we've got we call it an OLT, an Oceania leadership team. So when I'm appointed or appointed leader, there's a leadership team appointed. And so there's 5 on that leadership team at the moment. We had 6, but it's gone down to 5. And we meet monthly, every month for 1 week. And if there's an agenda, we have about 3 days of agenda meeting. We might have supervision, and then we have reflective practice. We would take 1 or 2 topics of which we don't as an agenda, and we reflect about it. All decisions that are made are noted at that meeting by our secretary, and it's a consensus model. It's not done by me, and I certainly don't want it that way. So it's a shared responsibility of the province, but legally I am the leader.
Thank you. Father, can I just ask you a little about how the Institute manages claims that have come through and that might still be coming through? You've indicated in your statement that the process under Towards Healing is a process that's available, but it's not your preferred process for managing claims. Is that right?
Correct. Well, I don't know if it's our preferred, but we're certainly not moving. We're having more non-Towards Healing claims than with them, yes.
Now, you've described in particular a system of dispute resolution that was worked out between your lawyers, Carolyn O'Day, and Waller Legal, which is Dr. Vivian Waller's legal firm.
Yes.
Can you just explain a little for the commissioners and those listening what that process involves?
Yes, it's proved to be the best process for us. That's all I can say for that. I think the essential difference that's come in, talking with Waller Legal and our lawyers, there's an agreement of how the process will go. So it's not combative, it's consensual, it's victim-focused. One thing that's significantly different is that before we would enter a mediation process of the 2 groups, we would say that person needs to be legally represented. And that's where Waller comes in, Vivian Waller. And that's costed within us, with the province. The other significant part for me is that we've trained up, myself included, the leadership team, plus of about 4 other brothers, so there's about a pool of about 10, and we're prepared to meet with the survivor if they require it, if they ask for it. So that's where the power is. They don't have to meet the church authority if they don't want to, but if they do, they can. And for me, there are 3 components to that. There's compensation financially, there's the offer of counselling, which many take, and other supports, and the other is the apology. And at times I feel that the apology gets a 3rd rung, but from my experience is the apology is crucial in many ways, if the survivor wants it, to bringing some sense of resolution, dare I say healing towards that, of the abuse that happened in the past. My personal experience of that's what I gauge that comment on, to the extent that even some, 2 in fact, have invited me to their homes to meet their families and have a meal with them. Now, I thought that's the best I could hope for, even though the damage and the hurt is still there. But their acceptance of what's happened and their desire to get the best opportunities to move on with their families has happened.
So is the apology something that you deliver personally?
If it's required of me, I will. And a letter or personal, I will do that. But often it is not me. It would be arranged through our professional standards office and maybe 1 other brother. But we have a brother do it where the survivor would want that. Again, its emphasis is on what the needs of the survivor. From my understanding, if a survivor met a Christian brother, it might be re-traumatising. So, of course, we wouldn't want that. So, sadly as it is, that's the fact.
Now, I understand one of the advantages, at least in your eye, of this process is that it's a fast one. Can you give us an indication of how quickly, using this process involving Waller Legal, you can resolve a claim once it's notified to you?
No, I can't, because I can't recall it. I think it would be over some months because the actual mediation might take a day or less. And once the mediation's happened, but the lead up, once the notification has come, we've received information from Walla Legal and they want information from us. So it would take us to do the research and forward that information that's requested to them. That may take some time, but we do believe it's far quicker and more satisfying doing it that way. So the actual mediation might be a couple of hours a day. If the mediation doesn't come to some resolution, we may have to get an independent person, a mediator, to help, but I don't think that happens often. And I believe that, well, it really hit me that a lot of the men in Perth in particular are senior men, and they need the healing, they need the compensation now, and I think we do it as rapidly as we can.
Now, the Christian Brothers, following case study 11 in the Royal Commission, had a process of re-examining settlements that had already occurred, and I think you've indicated that there were 201 requests to re-examine previous settlements, and that resulted in 165 settlements being reopened and additional money being paid, in fact nearly 14 million in total. Now, that was mostly using this Walla legal process, was it?
Yes, it was. I think at least 70 of those, yeah.
Thank you. Did you reach any conclusions about what had happened the first time around to produce what, on reflection, were thought to be such inadequate settlements in so many cases?
I haven't given it a lot, but to me there may have been elements of denial, and we thought we're going to be taken to the cleaners, which we could still, but there was kind of a defensiveness, a reluctance to come and speak with legal people. I think Vivian Waller has allowed us and opened to us that there is a humane approach that can happen. I don't think that approach was there previously.
Can I ask you to address the question which His Honour put to Sister Locke earlier, which is that people who've been in orphanages, and that would include a lot of the people who were in Christian Brothers institutions and suffered abuse, have an additional level of trauma and suffering because of their personal circumstances. Is that something that you're satisfied that you and others dealing with them understand and are appropriately trained to deal with?
I personally probably am limited in it because of my own personal training. It's my understanding from advice that I'm given that that's the counselling that's very important. So it's just not good enough, I believe, to send a person off to a counsellor. We have to try and help and associate and name counsellors that are really skilled in this area. And I know Geraldine Robinson, whom I've had conversations with, has really emphasised that with us. So there's particular training in counselling around trauma that can help the survivor. I think sometimes counselling, if it's not focused on the needs of the client, can go on. And I just wonder of the assistance that could be given to that person. But I do agree with your comment that there's a double level of trauma that needs to be acknowledged in those people that had that happen to them.
Well, you say you have to try and help associate and name counsellors that are skilled in this area. Now, are you presently doing that?
I wouldn't know the counsellors that people are going to at this stage, no, Your Honour.
Or do you think you should check that out?
I think that would be very important. My hope would be that our Professional Standards Office, and I will check that today, would have that knowledge, and it is their recommendation that certain people go to certain counsellors, and same with the legal advice of the survivor would also have that knowledge. But me personally, I haven't got that knowledge.
Brother Clinch, have the Christian Brothers formed a view yet about whether they will opt into the Commonwealth redress scheme?
Yeah. Yes, we have. I believe that we've started our own redress scheme, and that it's certainly at a cost. But we believed it was a right path to go if we were to be survivor victim focused. And what I've seen and read about the Commonwealth redress scheme, I certainly hope it takes off and it's effective.
So does that mean the Christian Brothers are in?
From my present knowledge, yes, I would want them to go in, but I think, as we all know, it's pretty sparse, the detail, even though what states will, hopefully all states will come in. But that's my knowledge. I'm not quite sure if all states are going to be present, and yet we would have claims from all states. So how that's going to be done. And my other concern, Your Honour, would be that we've spent, as the figures are there, millions of dollars so far on our own redress scheme. How is that going to be accounted for? You know, we've only got
that has been provided for in the recommendations we've made. So
well, I hope
you needn't be worried about that.
Good. Yeah. Well, I will certainly follow that up.
Have you read our redress recommendations?
I did when they came out, but they're not fresh in my memory. I haven't read them in recent times.
Brother Clinch, you've explained in your statement part of the child protection framework that applies in the Christian Brothers and the role of a person who holds the title of the Children's Services Standards Coordinator, and that's Dr. Pauline Mima-Duma. Can you just explain a little about who that is and what that role involves?
Yes, certainly. Pauline Mima-Duma, Dr. Pauline Mima-Duma is highly trained and done good studies and lectured in university in the area of child protection, and she is also engaged by foreign governments to go and do special work with them in the area of child protection, where development of policies. So she's highly qualified and highly valued within our group. We would have a number of services, as we call it there, that would meet with children, have children's programs. There are no brothers involved, but we, as the Brothers of Oceania Province, supply a small amount of money to sponsor those. And it is our belief that we need to be absolutely certain that the volunteers are well trained in the area of child protection, and that Pauline would oversee that, and she does. She does the training herself. And the other area in which we've engaged Pauline only in more recent times is in the auditing of our community residences, that they are child safe. And she has made recommendations where brothers, if they have allegations against them, should not live. So Pauline is an invaluable resource to us as a province, and I would meet with her regularly, and she works with our ministry leaders, as we call them.
Thank you. Does she also provide advice on how to deal with brothers who have been the subject of established allegations? That is, they've either been criminally convicted of offences or they've been found by the Christian Brothers to have been perpetrating abuse?
Not directly. Most of that would be, we've got another arm, which is, they're different but connected, is the Professional Standards Office. That has an executive officer, and it has a number of staff to assist us in those historical claims, and as well as brothers and their appropriateness if they've been criminally convicted, or there have been civil matters that prove that there is some matters of concern there.
What is the protocol or the policy for dealing with brothers in that position? Are they required to leave the order?
No. At this stage, this was a matter that caused me great concern, and I've grappled with it since Ballarat. So over the past 12 months to 18 months, we've developed a protocol in that area. It's taken longer than I'd hoped, but we did consult all our brothers, and we had right consultation. I believe that was required if we're going to educate our brothers in this matter. So to start with, we've grappled with it, and it's been a big topic of conversation, particularly for the leadership team. I listened to Geraldine Robinson, who we've sought her advice outside of the Commission before, because we had times with our brothers at Encompass and Vitality, the programs that she conducts. So I'm aware that it can be helpful to the community at large if we have restrictions on some of the men and they remain within the community. But we've also decided that there are cases where that's not possible to live within the community. It just wouldn't fit. Public perception is so strong that there needs to be dismissal of those brothers.
Now, is the power of dismissal something that's available to you as the provincial?
No, it's not. So if I decided, with the team decided, that a certain brother should leave, we would ask that brother to leave to make the process simpler for him and for us. If that case was not to happen, I would have to then write a letter of explanation to the congregation leader, and he in turn would make representation to the Vatican, who ultimately then dismisses the brother from his vows.
And is that something that the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith has a role in?
Sorry?
Is that something that the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith has a role in the Vatican?
No, it's the group of religious life and institutes.
Thank you. So it's the case then, is it, Brother Clinch, that in exceptional circumstances you will ask a brother to leave, and if that doesn't occur, seek to have them dismissed, but the ordinary position is you would seek to manage the brother but keep them within the order? Is that
as best we can?
And are they under a formal plan or agreement of any kind?
Yes, we've been, since Ballarat, a lot has happened, and we've, again, another protocol has been developed that outlines what we will do, and I've tendered that. And a brother who has got under suspicion, even that, those who have been convicted and, say, been released, they must go on what we call a safety plan. And the safety plan outlines how the supervision will happen and their place of residence and whom they shall meet with, etc. And then there is a care plan. And this was one that shocked me a bit. The care plan is for them, because we know that self-harm can happen. So we make sure that that care plan would include counselling, supervision, medical treatment, and companions in their own life that can accompany them outside of the house of residence.
And who is responsible for supervising them and making sure they adhere to these plans?
It would be the leadership team. We've got one brother on our leadership team who is responsible for professional standards. They would report to him. But what we have a supervisor, and that would oversee any brother that's on a plan to make sure that they're done and adhered to. And every 3 months we've decided that we've got an external person that's outside of our order, outside of our Catholic organisation even, we've decided, who gets reports from the supervisor, we call it the monitor, who will monitor and make recommendations about any of those brothers. So it's a three-tiered really. The initial supervisor, to the monitor, to the leader.
Thank you.
Brother Clinch, I'm unclear on what occasions you might recommend the dismissal of a brother. The evidence before us and other inquiries and our own information from private sessions is that care leavers and others who suffered sexual abuse and other abuse from the Christian brothers recognise that convictions address the crime, but they don't address the damage.
Yes.
and those people tell us that the lifelong damage to them and the allegations of, which are mostly unprovable, of large numbers of suicides and early death as a result of the abuse, are never recognised by the court process, and can't be, because the court has to deal with the crime. But the Christian brothers can recognise that in their decisions as to how to treat the person who's been convicted. So when you make a recommendation, for instance, for dismissal, do you actively examine the damage that person has done?
Certainly. There's one case at the moment that's very relevant, and I've seen the damage there by the number of complaints. And I understand, because I've met with some of the survivors and they've told me their stories. So I appreciate the lifelong damage that's happened, and to their families as well. And I'm very aware of that and very sad about it. And to me, the tipping point, whether a person, and I call them a person for the devil of their brother, but they remain within our community. Those who remain within our community, if there's denial or lack of remorse, I'd say that's a sign that the community can't hold them properly. So that would be a tipping point for me, whether a person will be dismissed or not.
As far as I understand it, the evidence to us of the pathology of such individuals is they are likely to be deceitful and in denial. But my question remains, do you formally assess damage in making your decision as to whether dismissal should occur, or do you not examine that as a material matter?
Well, we have records of each of those people, and those records would be examined by myself or by those who are making those decisions to the level. But do I have a psychological reports on all of those to that level? Some do, some don't. So I would not see all those, say, psychological reports of damage, but most of them are on file, and I do read them if they come to my way, or I ask for them.
So to conclude, in precise numbers, have you, in your term as provincial, recommended any Christian brothers for dismissal?
Yes, I have.
How many?
2.
And that is out of how many that have come before you?
Well, there are many of those who, well, the figures indicate that. There are others that need consideration. So there's only 2 that have come to my actual table for examination.
I think I'll take them on the adjournment, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. All stand.